Last fall, we headed to Wyoming and tried something a little different. We wanted to visit the Wind River Range, and to be closer to all the trails we wanted to hike, we rented a van and lived in it for a week. We rented the van in Salt Lake City from a company called Wander Vans. Ours was a 2019 Ford Transit. They do a pretty simple camper conversion. You get a bed, a sink, fridge, toilet, and DC power, but more on the van later in the video. There aren't a lot of towns near the Wind River Range, so before we left Salt Lake City, we stocked up on groceries. Then we started the long drive. It's about 4 hours to the closest town to where we're headed, and then the trailhead we're going to is down a 19-mile dirt road after that. We ended up only going about halfway down the dirt road before stopping for the night. I could only go about 13 miles an hour on this road in the van, so we left the rest of the drive for the morning. The area here is managed by the Forest Service, and you can pretty much camp anywhere alongside the road. There are some easy-to-spot established campsites, and we found a great one right along the Green River. With a little daylight still left, we set up our stove, cooked dinner by the river, and then settled in for our first night in the van. In the morning, our campsite looked even more beautiful, and also much chillier, which is when we discovered that the heater didn't work. We just couldn't get this controller to turn it on. But we'll have to deal with that later. It's the weekend and we're an hour away from phone service anyway. So after another lovely, albeit cold, meal by the river, we drove the rest of the way out to Green River Lake's trailhead, stopping at a Forest Service campground along the way to top up our water tank. Before we hit the trail, let's take a quick tour of the van and see what it's like inside.
Hey, you want to take a look inside the van? All right. This is our mudroom. We try and take our shoes off before we come in the van so we don't make a mess. We've got a broom so we can sweep out the van. Come inside. In here we have, this is our fridge. This also serves as our coffee table in the evening. We have some TP, tissues, paper towels, all of which are super important to keep camp clean, which is not quite the same as real clean, but it's pretty good. This is our bench, and we use that a bunch. It's our couch, it's everything we got. Under here, this is the cassette toilet. We use it if you have to get up and pee in the middle of the night. If you have to pee in the middle of the night, the toilet's like right out here in the living room, so not ideal, but it's better than getting out in the cold. Back here we have our kitchen cabinets. These are some market bags. We just bought them on Amazon before the trip, but they have been super, super handy. At night, time to shut things down. Just slide it along. Works pretty well. In the back of the van, we have a sack that's like our pantry and a sack that's kind of like things to clean up with. It's an organized mess. And up here's our bed. It's actually pretty comfortable. Those are our camping quilts that we sleep under at night. And on the really cold nights, there's an extra blanket and an extra sheet. And then this is our sink. Underneath is the water. This jug is the clean water, and that's the gray water. So like when we brush our teeth and that kind of stuff, the little bit of water used goes down there. We have not used the gray much at all, but we refill the clean water every couple of days. This is our one and only countertop, so the bed ends up being used for stuff too. And this is the hand pump. It takes it a minute to get going. But then we can fill up a bottle.
Now that we've taken a look around the van, it's time to start hiking. We're hiking the Green River Lakes Loop, and we're always excited to be doing a loop instead of an out and back. We started on the east side of the lake, and that turned out to be where the best views were. Once you loop back on the west side, you're in the trees and can't see too much. And there were quite a few places where trees had fallen over and were blocking the trail, but nothing you couldn't climb over or get around. We'd originally planned to overnight here, but we didn't find enough other trails we thought would be exciting nearby. So we headed back the long dirt road and camped about 7 miles from the start, which should make tomorrow's drive about half an hour. It was raining off and on, so we had a little snack in the van while we waited for the rain to stop. This van had no roof vents, so you couldn't use the stove inside. Luckily, the rain stopped just long enough for us to cook dinner outside and enjoy another evening along the Green River. The next morning, we drove to the town of Pinedale and found a city park with practically everything we needed. Toilets that you could flush, a place to cook breakfast, and even throw away your trash. Pinedale is a really small town, only about 2,000 people, but it's very hiker-friendly. They even have a designated tent camping site in town. It costs a couple of bucks to camp here, but we stopped by just to fill up our water. Even after only a couple of days in the van, we developed the ability to spot where you can get water and also where you can throw away trash, which is harder to find. And since we had phone service, we left the Wondervan's folks a voicemail asking for help with the heater. But it's Sunday, so we weren't sure if anyone would be around. With all our town chores done, now we're ready to drive over to the east side of the Wind River Range.
Well, we have a little bit of a detour. And by a little bit, it looks like at least 5 hours of unexpected driving today. The mountain pass is closed due to high winds, gusting up to 70 miles an hour. So we are detouring way around. But we're going to get back to our adventures in a mere 4 to 5 hours.
After a long, tiring day of driving, we finally arrived at our campsite with barely enough time to prepare a meal before dark.
Good morning. It's lovely.
The next morning was much better. We had a great spot right on a lake. The Forest Service campgrounds around here are closed for the winter, but you're still allowed to use them. It just means they're not collecting fees, you have to pack out all your trash, and they may have shut off the water for winter. Yesterday we had our solar shower on the dash all day, but still couldn't get it hot enough. But today is sunny, so I've got a really good feeling about having a shower today. With the shower bag in the sun, we were ready to hit the trail. Today we're doing a pretty long day hike, about 16 miles round trip, but we want to see the granite peaks and iconic views that the Wind River Range is famous for, and to see that, you've got to hike a good while to get out of the forest and into the basin. Today's hike goes to a series of lakes. At one particular spot on the trail, we got the tiniest bit of phone signal, and Michelle got a text from Wondervan's with instructions for how to reset the heater in the van. Let's hope that works, because it's going to be cold tonight. Usually when we're hiking, we're on the lookout for the perfect lunch spot, and when we got to this clearing, we knew we found it.
It's about 12 o'clock. Time for lunch.
Backcountry sandwich.
That's right. Got pita, salami, some pepperoncini in a bag that has leaked.
We only saw one other group on this trail all day. These guys were going to overnight at the basin, which is probably the best way to do it since this is a really long out and back to do in one day. We brought our overnight backpacking gear with us, but ended up chickening out because it was just too cold for us. We're from Florida, remember? A few miles after lunch, we finally reached the first of the lakes.
Oh, I see the lake.
The trail continues along the lakes for another couple of miles, but this was our destination. We finally could see the gorgeous basin views.
This is about 8.5 miles from the van, and this is our turnaround point if we want to be back at the van around 1:45. So
5:30.
yeah, 5:30. Yeah, it's 1:45 now. This is the turnaround if we want to be back at 5:30. So this is it for us.
As we headed back, the weather started to change.
Somehow, it is clouded up, and it seems like there's a little bit of snow.
That little bit of snow turned into a little bit more, then a little bit more, and before we knew it, things were a whole lot colder and snowier than when we started the day. And how could I forget the water crossing? This is about 1 mile from the trailhead, and probably more fun in the summer.
A little cold for that.
Not long after that, we made it back to the campground, and as a bonus, we found that the water hadn't been turned off.
It works.
Back at the van, it finally quit snowing, and more importantly, the secret reset procedure we got for the heater got it working, which was good because it was 34 degrees inside the van. That shower, though, we'll have to try again tomorrow. The next day was another beautiful sunny morning at the campsite. We decided to do a much shorter, more relaxed hike today. But before we hit the trail, I am not giving up on heating up this shower bag. We're headed to the Upper Brewers Trail, and the trail leaves basically from the campground. This trailhead had something I'd never seen before. You scrub your shoes to remove any invasive plants before you start hiking. This trail's on the other side of the lake from the campground, and we could even see the van across the lake. Since it was such a short hike, we even could take our smaller packs, which is always a treat. And with that weight savings, we could even pack in a couple of beers to have with lunch. After this quick hike, it was time to head to our next Forest Service campground, about 30 minutes away. As luck would have it, while we were staying here, they graded the dirt road in, which made the drive out much smoother. At the next campground, we again had our pick of sights since it was the winter season. We found a great spot right on the lake, but more importantly, the shower bag was now hot enough to register on its thermometer, so we'll see if we can get 2 people showered with 3 gallons of lukewarm water.
Okay, it's time to do this.
And we really did both get a shower out of that 3-gallon bag. We just had to be really careful with how much water we used. Refreshed from our first shower in 4 days, we cooked up a pot of chili for dinner while there was still some daylight. Just like the last place we stayed, there's a trail you can access right from the campground. So we headed out to Silas Lake Trail. This trail takes you by a few lakes, and we plan to go all the way to Thumb Lake, which is above treeline, and then turn around and come back. There was a whole lot of rocky uphill through the trees on this trail. I don't know if it was because we weren't expecting it or if it was just that difficult, but for both of us, this felt pretty hard. At about 3.5 miles, we made it to Upper Silas Lake. It's a scenic spot, but we didn't linger long because it was so windy. Instead, we headed on to the next lake. But before we could get there, about a mile later, Michelle saw a bear on the trail. It was as surprised as we were and started running the other way up the trail, so to be safe, we turned around there. We probably would have been fine to continue, but we were just looking for a nice place to have lunch, so we stopped somewhere that overlooked Upper Silas Lake and called it just as good. Back at the van, the shower bag was hot today, but it was just too windy for a shower. Better luck tomorrow. In the morning, we headed back to the west side of the Wind River Range, but this time we could take the shorter route through South Pass that was closed the other day. We stopped in Pinedale for lunch at the park and to fill up our water tank. Then it was time to drive north of Pinedale to our next campsite. This area was barren high desert. After several miles of dirt road, we eventually made it to Willow Lake Campground. We got a spot right on the lake, but this campsite was hot, dusty, and buggy. So after a very quick shower, we decided to head somewhere at higher elevation. We drove about 40 minutes to End Campground. This was the only one of the whole trip that was collecting fees. It was $12 a night, but the road was paved all the way to the campground, and we even had a paved pad to park on.
Best decision ever.
Once again, we lucked out and there was a trailhead we could walk to from the campsite. This is Pole Creek Trail, but a few miles in, you can split off onto Miller Lake Trail and turn it into a loop, seeing Miller Lake, Sweeney Lake, and Photographer's Point. A big storm about a year before had blown down a lot of trees. Thankfully, this part of the trail was well maintained and everything had been cleared, but some of the trees that came down were absolutely huge.
Very grateful to the trail crew.
About 3.5 miles in, we reached the turnoff for Miller Lake, and we ran into another couple of hikers who warned us that the trail here was not in as good condition. This trail is definitely not as well traveled. We almost lost the trail in the trees here above Miller Lake. Just after that, Michelle hit her head ducking under this tree that was across the trail.
This is very dangerous. Very, very dangerous.
It's a good thing she had a hat on, but even still, it left a cut in her head. Thankfully, once we washed it out, it turned out to be pretty small. So we decided to keep on hiking. We were almost as far away from the trailhead as we were going to get anyway. After about another mile of climbing over trees, we stopped at Middle Sweeney Lake for lunch and had the place all to ourselves. Then we took the fork north onto Sweeney Creek Trail to get back onto the main trail where we started. There was one more scenic stop to make. Photographer's Point is a very popular spot on Pole Creek Trail because you can see down into the valley below and all the mountains on the other side. If you just wanted to come here, it's about 5 miles from the trailhead, which is where we headed, and then back to the van. Tonight would be our last night sleeping in the van, and our last van dinner.
Pesto pasta night.
Pesto pasta became Michelle's favorite van meal on this trip. The next day, on the way to Pinedale, there was time for one last short hike, so we took a very rough 2-mile dirt road to Half Moon Lake. This was a nice trail around the lake, but man, it was hot. Thankfully, since we were heading into town to a hotel for our last night, it didn't matter how sweaty we got because we were going to have proper showers tonight.
We decided to have one last van lunch. So we're parked at the trailhead, which is absolutely gorgeous, and we're in the van having tacos.
These are the best tortilla chips, by the way. I wish I could get these in Florida. We drove back into Pinedale for our last night. Wandervans had made it very clear that we had to wash the van, which was a little inconvenient. I'd rather they just charge a little extra for cleaning. Then we headed to a hotel for the first real shower in a week, And food cooked by someone else. What a luxury. Living out of the van let us go places you otherwise couldn't drive to for a day hike, which was exactly what we wanted to do. We got to see some pretty amazing places, and we had a great time. But would we be willing to do something like this again? Turns out that's exactly what we did on our next trip, but that's another video.